Give me 30 minutes and I'll help you fix your agency. Not in theory or using some fancy course. In reality, we're going to take 30 minutes and work through your agency using a simple tool to identify what's wrong, what's broken, and what you can actually do about it. This is the same approach I use with every single one of the 40 agencies I've now worked with one-to-one. This is not about using more tactics or hacks to try and fix things today or tomorrow. This is about giving you, the owner, clarity to show you what you need to work on and why. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through step by step the things I would do if you were doing a paid for audit with me to help you get the clarity on what you need to fix or address or improve and why, as part of building the agency that you really want. Quick note before we dive in, I've linked this tool below as well. You can click through that link to get your copy and do this with me as I go through it or in your own time. Separately, if you'd rather have someone sit down and do this with you to get an objective perspective on things from outside your own business, then this is obviously a key thing I do with any client before I start working with them. So if you'd like to speak to me about doing that, click the call book link in the description as well. You'll be able to speak to me about the audit process and see if it would be beneficial to do it with me as opposed to doing this yourself. Okay, so let's get stuck in. The self-audit tool that I've created is built entirely on the 40 plus audits I've now done of agencies. So the process here is to dig into 5 key components of the agency. We're going to pick certain areas quite deliberately and ask sometimes quite tough questions about each of these areas. It's going to help us identify where the real good stuff is happening, where the not so good things are happening, and maybe even pinpoint certain things that the owner was completely oblivious to. The outcome of doing this is that you're going to come away with probably about 3, 4, 5 priorities. These are not things you can do all at once in 1 week probably, but there's things you're going to tee up over the course of the next 30 to 90 days and begin working on or do that will get you on the right track. When you first open up the agency self-audit tool, you're going to be presented with an intro from yours truly. All I'm doing is setting the scene here and again, highlighting why we're actually doing this in the first place. One quick note, I have added a 1-pager reference sheet to the bottom of the tool as well. I would recommend actually printing that out and having it as a reference point as you go along. When we reach the first section then, this is about the owner. And the owner is, without doubt, in my view, the most important person in the agency, particularly given the stage that most of the agencies are at that do this audit with me. So this section is about you, the owner, your role, your time, your headspace. And it's about where you're taking the business. Let's begin. The first questions are quite broad. And by quite broad, they're quite scene setting. How's it going? So honestly, how is your agency doing right now from your perspective? This is not what you should be doing or how you feel it should be going. How is it actually doing? And you can go in whatever direction you wish with this. The main thing people like to do here is to begin with maybe some numbers. So you might summarize in your own words what it means to you in terms of the financials. You might summarize how it's going in terms of clients. And you might summarize in terms of year-on-year progress or growth. Generally speaking, it will be the owner's overview of what's going well and what isn't. Also at this point, there will probably be a personal reflection that you might want to begin digging into. And although we're going to get into elements of this in more detail, I think this is arguably one of the most important areas in this audit. This is your chance to be very open and honest with myself, if you do it with me, or simply yourself and maybe your co-founder about how it's really doing. If you've been running this business for 3, 4, 5 years, I would hedge my bets and say that you probably haven't done something like this. And if you have, well done. So the next question then is, what is top of mind for this week? This is really my way of establishing what feels urgent to certain people and why. So for example, if someone said to me what's top of mind this week is hiring, that might be something that we dig into in more detail shortly. It might be client churn. Okay, interesting. Very common thing within agencies that owners sometimes struggle to handle. It generally will be profitability. It's something that's flagged during this type of session. Basically, it could be a whole host of things. It might be a dry pipeline. Next section then is your current role. So this is very much about you, the owner within the agency. What role are you playing? Now, I'm going to read through these questions and then I'm going to give a bit of a summary of, again, things you might want to consider here. So list everything you currently do in the business. Include the things you shouldn't be doing, but you are doing anyhow. What percentage of your time goes towards each of these things? And in an ideal world, what would you be spending your time on? So there are 3 sections there. The last section I'll come back to in a second. So first of all, what are you really doing with your time is the question. And this is a really, really important point. What are you actually spending your time on, and how much time are you spending on those things? Case in point, when I ask this question, it generally will come back to 3 things. Something relating to clients. So again, let's imagine the scenario, agency owner doing around $1 million in annual revenue. I would expect this owner, in a lot of cases, to still be involved somewhat in client strategy and relationships, and maybe even delivery. And if that's the case, that's an immediate flag, and it will be something that I will come back to. But generally speaking, if you're in that million a year in revenue range, you've got yourself to a place where you're probably less involved, if at all, in delivery, which is good. Beyond that then, sales and marketing. So pipeline, or generally described as sales and new business. What else? Well, typically it'll be the ops / financials / admin. And then beyond that, we probably have team management. And as we explore these avenues with the owner, what you'll see occurring here is that the owner, regardless of what revenue they're at, let's just say the $1 million range for now, they're involved in all of these key areas across this business. I would be surprised if they also weren't then overseeing things like the system or how the business functions. So they might say, I build the processes or something like that. This is very common. And when I get these 4 or 5 points, which I almost always do when I ask this question about what you're really doing with your time, and an owner might say 40% of my time is clients. They might say 10% of my time is on sales. They might say 10% is on ops, financials, and admin. They might say 30 is on team, and then they might say something like 5 or 10% is spent on systems. Now, this is an incredibly typical example, and this is exactly why we do this audit, because the number of owners that will react with surprise whenever they see these numbers is quite high. They won't realize how much of their time, how many hours they're spending currently doing things that honestly they didn't even know they're doing, or if they did know, they feel frustrated about the fact they still have to do it. So for example, a follow-on from this then might be, I really don't like the fact that I have to do all the strategy work for clients. I really don't like the fact that I have to do one-to-ones with everyone in the team / oversee everything that everyone's doing. Whatever it might be, and that bit's going to vary from owner to owner, it's going to be a point of frustration for them. And this is the foundation piece that we use to establish pretty much how the owner is doing, what they should be doing, which we'll come into in a second, and then what we're going to do about it. So if we go back here a second, what you might find is that the reason the owner feels like they have to spend time on clients is because it won't be done right, or the relationship will tail off, or the work won't be done to a high enough standard without them involved. When in reality, if they have a certain person in place in the business, it's probably quite the opposite. Same with the team. Well, nobody else can manage these people, so I have to do it. The owner will be very good at coming up with a reason or an excuse for why certain things are currently happening the way they are. So the next step then is to layer in what should or what would the owner like to be spending more time on if they could start from scratch. And this time around, the owner might say something like, well, I want to focus on growing the business. So I want to spend 50 or 60% of my time on sales and marketing. They then might say that, yeah, well, look, still need to do the financial piece, which is fair enough. I probably have 1 or 2 administrative things involved as well, which, it's 5 to 10% of your week, I suppose. And then what do they do with the rest of the time? And that's where really the choice is available to the owner. This owner might decide that, look, in terms of clients and strategy, I still want to be involved, but just significantly lower amount of time. And then you're left with this 30%. And quite often, the owner at this point of the conversation, and you might feel yourself doing this right now, will say something like, well, how am I going to fill this 30%? My question would be, do we have to? Because if we don't have to, this is ideal. That 30% is hours in the day where the owner does not have any expectation of themselves to be doing anything specific. It is time and space to think, to opt into doing certain things, to run certain tests, to participate in certain networking events, or participate in a bit more sales and marketing activity than planned. It is space for the owner to operate in that is focused around the theme of growing the business or improving how it runs. That is precious time to the owner. So when the question is asked, ideally, what would you spend your time on? Yes, it might be these things, but then the most important bit is this. It's space. That's hugely valuable to any owner. So whenever you do this for yourself, see where you land in terms of things you think you should be doing and how much time it should take you to spend on each of those things to get yourself moving in the direction you want. The next section then is pressure and sustainability. Now, this is around the theme of obviously how much stress and strain you're feeling or experiencing. And as an owner, frankly, if you're doing one of these audits with me, you're probably under a lot of pressure or you've felt a lot of stress and strain recently. So, quite simple. A scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? 10, you're close to breaking point or you've burnt out. 1, you're coasting along and feeling no pressure whatsoever. Don't think I've ever had someone say 1 for what it's worth. Is that level of pressure sustainable? Yes or no? And why? And when did you last take a proper break from your business? These are questions I literally ask every single time, or a version of them, because they help me establish how an owner is doing, how they're feeling, and really how they're operating. If an owner, for example, says, I haven't taken a holiday in a year, that is a massive problem. Really, I'm not too concerned about who you are or what you do. In my view, as an advisor or someone trying to help you, I want you to get to a place where you absolutely can and should be taking regular breaks, the same way anyone in your team would. The final and arguably most important section of this key component of your agency is vision and direction. The big question here is, what do you ultimately want? What do you want as an owner? That is a huge question that only you can answer. And it's really key to everything else that comes after this in terms of this audit, but everything you decide to do from here on out with your agency. So I am going to say that this is a key question to answer. And I am going to say, take your time with this one. During this audit process, you might not be able to answer this in the way you'd like, but you have to answer it. Because if we don't even have a starting point, it's very difficult to say what we could do or what we might want to prioritize. If you honestly feel like you don't know the answer to this, I would say pause. Don't do any more of this audit until you've answered this question for yourself. That might seem like odd advice, but to be honest, this is going to inform too many things and it's going to inform too many tactics and strategies you want to deploy. So if you really do not know the answer to this question, give yourself some space over the next couple of weeks and then come back to this audit and do it then. If you do know what the answer to this is, of course, write it down. There are some more specific questions based on your answer here that might be more or less applicable. So for example, if you do want to say, oh, what's your number? Why that number is always the follow-on question there. Some people say 5 million. I always wonder why 5? Does it just that it sounds nice? Was it that you read a book that said something about 5 million? The big one that I like to come back to here is, if we are having a coffee 12 or 18 months from now, what would you love to be able to say to me? You would love to be able to say that these 3 things happened, or this is what the business now looks like. Questions relating to revenue are always helpful, but again, I'm apprehensive to say that your target should be based solely on revenue alone. If anything, building towards revenue is probably a means to an end. And then there are questions like, is there a documented plan to get there, to help me establish how far along in your journey you are? Again, the majority of people that I do this with don't have a plan. They have an idea about what they want to create. But as far as a plan is concerned, they don't have one yet. Probably part of the reason they're doing what they are. Does everybody in the team know where you're going? And when did you last sit down and properly think about this stage of things? These are all questions that help me understand and will help you understand when you do this yourself, where you're at with things as of today. The most common trap at this stage is not being honest with what you want and not having any clear direction for what you're building towards. Without that, it's very, very difficult to make good decisions quickly that will help you move in the right direction. All right, so we'll move on to section 2 now, which is about clients. And when I do this audit with clients, there is quite a systematic approach to which sections we do in which order. It might depend on the answers that the owner produced during the first section. That informs whether we do clients or people next. But generally speaking, the clients piece will be up there. So that's why it's number 2 in this list. This is all about how you serve your clients, who they are, what you do for them, trying to establish, do you measure the performance beyond maybe results and revenue, or how do you assess which clients are doing really well from those that maybe aren't really ideal for your agency. So as you scroll through this, you'll notice that there are 4 parts to this section. There's a client overview, there's an ideal client profile, then there are the hard questions that as I refer to them, because these are usually trying to help you understand if you're working with the right clients or not. Then we've got a section which is exclusively on pricing. So let's dig into it by beginning with information that will generally give you a picture as of how things are going with your clients right now. How many retainer clients do you have? What is your MRR? Or what is your current on average month-to-month revenue if you do projects? And what is your retention rate for clients? Again, these are just basic numbers that you can jot down really quickly. Based on the answers that I receive to this or hear from owners, it might also inform what we speak about in more detail. So for example, if you had a lot of retained clients, but as we find out shortly, your pricing is a bit mixed or a bit all over the place, it could be interesting to dig into that in more detail. There's going to be an element to this as well, and you'll see it through the retention question. There'll be elements of this audit where you won't have answers, and that is okay, but that's still informative because it gives us an understanding of where you are with certain things today. So let's now think about your ideal client profile. So this is a chance to describe your ideal client in detail. The big question though then is how many of your current clients meet that criteria? And this is obviously quite revealing because in a lot of cases, I might speak to an agency that has 15 current clients and that sounds great, but only 4 of them are even remotely close to being what the owner considers ICP. Also, if you don't even know who your ideal clients are at this stage, absolutely fine. This is where you can write down what you feel might give you a good gauge as to what is or isn't ideal for you. Some ideas here that might help. Whenever we think about ideal clients, yes, of course, we speak about things like budget. An ideal client probably has more budget available to them to spend on whatever it is you're doing for them. But there could be a whole host of things beyond that. For example, an ideal client for your agency might be someone that comes from a certain industry. It might be someone that has worked with an agency before. It might be someone that has a certain role within a certain business. Important note, I don't expect an agency to have 100% of their clients as ideal. From my perspective, that's not the aim. It's to have the majority of them ticking key boxes. The hard questions then. So this is a bit of a grounding exercise to help me understand and help yourself understand why you've ended up in the situation you've just described so far in this section. So have you signed clients that you knew were not right because you needed the revenue? Do you have clients you should probably let go of or increase the pricing for? And when clients churn, what is the most common reason? These are not easy questions to answer in some cases. I think if we're all being very honest and upfront, which we should be during this process, it will be the case that you, particularly in the early days, signed a lot of clients that you know yourself were not a great fit, but you did need the revenue. And I respect that, and that's part of this process. What we're not doing right now is trying to make any immediate fixes. We're just trying to build the picture of where we currently stand. So if you feel like, based on information or even your gut feeling, you have clients that you probably shouldn't be working with, all you have to do right now is just acknowledge that. Same goes for your pricing, because pricing is the next section, and we're going to dig into that in more detail. When clients churn, the reasons why they churn, truthfully, are not that unique from agency to agency. So if we look at that, for example, churn occurs, at least from my perspective, for two key reasons. One will be something to do with performance. Two will be something to do with the relationship. So what do I mean by this? For example, if a client churns because the results you're delivering are not very good, it's obviously a performance issue, or at least that's what they tell you, and you kind of have to take their word for it. So results are not good enough. If a client churns because they don't feel like you understand their business, or your strategy you've set is not along the lines of what they believe is optimal, or if they have a grievance with the way in which you communicate, that is very much down to the relationship side of things. So pretty much anything that is not to do with performance will fall under relationship. So basically what I'm saying is both of these things go hand in hand. It's very difficult to build a great partnership long term if you don't have a great relationship with a client. It's very hard to build a great partnership with a client if you don't deliver good results. So keep an eye out for those two things in particular. Last part of this section then is to do with pricing and value. So again, some grounding questions to help us understand what you're currently doing. What's your minimum engagement? Price and commitment, for example. So you might have a term in the contract, or you might have an entry point in terms of pricing. How did you arrive at your current price point? Don't be afraid to say, I just guessed. That again helps us understand where you are at with this as of today. Do you know your cost per client per month? Now, in almost every case, maybe more so with the smaller agencies, but in almost every case that I've done an audit, the answer to this is not really, or no. Again, perfectly fine. It's something we can work on, but it will help you understand maybe here's an opportunity for me to get more clarity in terms of where I'm leaking revenue or leaking profitability. And here's an area for me to really strengthen in the next 90 days. Last question in this section comes down to prices being raised or increased. When was the last time you did this? It's a fair chance that you've maybe never done it, and that's okay. I understand why that probably is the case. There's always a fear attached with increasing prices, meaning you might lose a client. It's just good to know when or if you have done this. So I suppose the broad theme here is establishing what has happened or what you're currently doing in terms of the work for clients or who you're helping, etc. A really key thing here is that the reason we do this is that client retention for most agencies is the building blocks. It's the foundation for future growth, and without it, it's going to be very, very difficult for me or anyone else to get you on the right track or help you grow this business. Section 3 then is about people, so your team. And we're going to dig into different aspects of this. But fundamentally, in the same way we just looked at clients, you're going to want to understand who you've got in as much detail as you can. So when you browse through this section, again, you'll see that there are different parts to it. There's a bit of an overview section. There's a performance reality check. For me, that's quite simply understanding how the team's currently doing. There's structure. So think of your org chart, etc., and how the team is set up. These sections will give you a very good look as to how things are currently going and maybe what areas under the team need to be improved. So for the purpose of the overview, we want to simply list out everybody that's currently in the business. And for the purposes of doing this, I would encourage you to add contractors and freelancers as well. Draw out the current org chart if you don't have one to hand, and try and define as part of this who owns what. I've said here who owns client relationships. Specifically, yes, that's really useful and helpful, but who owns other key things within the business? Try and add that layer in to help you understand who's responsible for what. If you can't do that, it's also an indicator that you maybe don't have the clarity in places that you probably should have. So again, as with the previous sections, it lets you know maybe if there's an opportunity or a gap within the existing model. So the performance reality check section is really about how each person in the business, including yourself, funnily enough, as the owner, is doing. Now, there are a series of questions in here which try to help us understand this. From agency to agency, how well you understand each individual in terms of their performance does vary a lot. So again, for the purpose of this audit, just give yourself as fair and honest a reflection in terms of how you're currently doing this, not how you would like to be doing this. For each team member, are they meeting expectations, yes or no? If you feel like the answer here is I don't know or I'm not sure, that's also a very good answer. Is there anyone underperforming that you're hoping will improve? What is the impact of that underperformance on the rest of the team? These are two areas. So are people underperforming? If so, who are they? and what is the impact on the rest of the team? These are quite difficult questions, but what I'd recommend here, and what I normally do as part of this audit, when we look at this for the first time, it can be quite difficult sometimes to understand answers to certain questions if you don't really have any measures in place. So while of course there's a skill element to a role, there's also a fit, and then you might have something like ambition as part of this as well. But skill is someone's ability to, as I would put it, do the work. If you have someone in an SEO exec role, it's their ability to do that job, be it 3, 4, 5 key things as part of being an SEO exec in your agency. How well they fit into your team is the next question, and this is obviously quite a cultural thing. A lot of agencies, particularly smaller ones, probably won't have any cultural measures in place. They might not even really have principles or values mapped out, and that's okay. But in an ideal world, we're trying to get to a place where you have something that helps you measure people based on their fit within the business too. The ambition one then is your understanding of who you have on your team and what's important to them. So who these people are, really, is how I would put this. And again, this is simply your understanding of what's really key to these people. It's an element of fit, I suppose, but the ambition piece is key for me because it helps you understand where this person could or might fit in down the line. And again, think about the different types of people at different stages in their lives and how ambition might change from year to year. If you have someone that's 24 versus someone that's 38, the probability is that their ambitions are quite different. And that's really, really important for you to understand. Are you going to measure someone on ambition? Not necessarily, but it's a really, really key thing to understanding why they might be performing or why they might be a certain type of fit within your business compared to other people. It's not a tool to measure people, it's a tool to help you understand who is on your team and maybe help you identify gaps on a personnel perspective. So when you have these things mapped out, you can obviously use these and build in kind of measures around them. So for example, skill might be defined as something to do with KPIs, these might be values, and then these might be preferences or ideal situation. So based on someone's ambitions or motivations, the impact on your agency might be different. The 3 questions under structure then obviously relate to how you've got the business set up with people in mind. Do you have people doing both implementation and account management? If you stepped out of the business tomorrow, what would break first? And what role would you hire next if money was not a constraint? These are the examples of 3 questions I like to ask to help me see or understand how the owner views people and what they do with the people in their team. Because if the owner steps out tomorrow and a certain area breaks, it kind of says a lot about maybe the people on that side of the business or how the owner has set it up. These 3 questions really just help me understand, again, from a personnel perspective, what's happening in the business. In an ideal world, an owner can and should step out of the company and it shouldn't break. In fact, it shouldn't even be an ideal world. That should just be the norm. If an owner has the cash to invest, it's always quite interesting to see where they would put the money. That also helps me understand, maybe truthfully, to the first point of the audit, how an owner sees himself within their own business. Because if the first thing they say as a salesperson, yet they've told me they want to spend 60% of their time on sales, something doesn't add up. They're either lying to themselves about what they want to do or what they want to spend their energy on, or they're maybe mismanaging where they put their cash, or maybe something just doesn't line up. Okay, so we've gone through now 4 of the 5 sections, which leaves us with the last one, which is pipeline. Pipeline is obviously about what's coming in the door, what conversations you're having, and fundamentally how efficiently you're moving a lead through the pipeline to convert it into a client. Now, this is again, I just keep reiterating the point that we're really trying to establish what's currently happening here as part of this audit. So when you get to the pipeline section, you'll see, again, there are different stages within this. Lead sources is the first section. So where do your leads come from? What percentage comes from each source? Which source produces your best clients? In most cases, it will be the same answer, given the stage your agency is likely at, in that you generate the majority of your leads through referral. You might have some inbound based on the channel that you're active on, and you might have some through outbound activity. Could be paid, could be organic. but frankly, the majority will be referral. And that is absolutely fair enough. What I always say to people at this stage is that it's a good sign for your agency that you're getting referrals. What often isn't in place is a system built around that. So whenever we look at what percentage comes from each source, there are plenty of agencies that have built up a very, very strong client portfolio with 60, 70, 80% of leads being referral. But it's also not been left up to chance. There's been a system or a strategy put in place to make that the case. The next section then is pipeline health. Now, how many leads did you get in the last 30 days? How many discovery calls or meetings did you have? How many proposals did you send? And how many did you close? Obviously, if we look at this in a little bit of detail, this is just trying to understand what is actually happening in terms of the activity you're running and your ability to close deals. A big thing for agencies of a certain size can often be this challenge around ghosting. So I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. If we think about the leads and then your ability to close these deals, a very, very typical funnel for a lot of people will be something like this. So they generate leads and they have a very simple sales cycle or a very simple sales process. The lead comes in the door, they have an intro call. And as part of that intro call, they might introduce their services, they might talk about the next step, they might mention something about pricing. It really depends. But generally speaking, there will be then some form of audit or proposal put together. The main thing I'd say here is that for a lot of agencies that I've worked with and done this audit with, this is a free audit. It's something that the agency puts together quite quickly based on something they can see either publicly or they may be given access to dig into things in a little bit more detail. Generally, this will be free. And what I would say is this is usually the point where I see a little bit of a challenge for most agencies in that they take this, send it to the client, and then they're ghosted. So this gets sent via email, and what happens? They don't hear anything back. Instead, there will be a couple of ways around that. But generally speaking, if the proposal is sent across, you might then have a session where you discuss that, discuss terms, and if the client's happy, they go ahead and start working with you. In any case, again, use this space and time to sketch out what is really happening, not just what you think should be happening. And also beyond that, have a think about maybe things you've tried in the past that worked well or didn't work so well. There's a fair chance that I suppose most agency owners will have dabbled in various strategies or tactics to get leads in the door. Often what they don't look at, and what I would observe quite often, is at this stage of the process. So what happens to the lead once it's in the door can be something you forget about or is a bit of an opportunity for most agencies to work on. The last section then of the pipeline is untapped areas. So this refers to a couple of key things that I would generally see owners maybe not doing so much of. When did you last ask a happy client for a referral? So that's a client where they're happy with performance and there's a good relationship. Do you have any strategic partnerships in place? And what have you tried that did not work in relation to generating leads or trying to fill your pipeline? One of the most interesting things, again, there's usually a fairly common answer for it because it usually is the owner, is who's responsible for business development. So the fourth stage to this audit is the processes and systems element. So we've gone through the owner, we've gone through clients, gone through people, and now it is processes and systems. So this is how the machine actually runs. This is how your agency is set up and it's how it operates. If you feel the answer to this is that you do not have any processes or systems, I think what you can use your time during this audit to do is just sketch out one answer to one question, which is, what do you currently do? And just almost riff on a blank canvas and see what happens. Because in almost any case that I speak to owners with about this, it'll be that they are actually kind of following a process, but it's up here. So the first stage can often be to just get it down on paper. There are, as always, some key questions you might want to answer as part of this. So is your delivery consistent client to client? Do you have documented SOPs for delivery? And what is the weakest part of your delivery right now? Again, similar theme to the previous sections. We're just trying to paint a picture of what is actually happening and what isn't happening. And once we do that, we can establish a baseline for how many processes or how strong your operating system is. One of my favorite questions to think about here is that if I put a stranger or a random person into your agency and said, tell me what's happening, how would they do? In the context of this audit, I framed it through the lens of, could they tell you what you do from your website? I think the same thing could be said for if they watch someone internally doing a certain thing. Could they explain clearly to that person what they're doing and why? Often the case will be yes, but is it written down somewhere for that same person to read? Probably not. One thing I like to really dwell on and spend some time on here is understanding what core processes or functions occur. So one thing you might want to consider doing at this stage is simply mapping out what you would consider your key systems. So for example, most agencies will have something that relates to client onboarding. What I would say would be that most owners will put a client through a process. The thing that will differ from client to client is maybe how much time the owner puts into certain things. Same goes for the out-and-out delivery system that an agency will use to actually do the work for their clients. The moment that a client signs, they get put into the onboarding system. The moment they complete the onboarding system, they might go into a typical monthly cycle. That monthly cycle could be comprised of many different things done by different people, but the same thing can and probably should happen month in, month out. In most agencies' cases, if they haven't really thought about this, it's not that the things aren't happening, it's just that they're happening at different times, in different ways, or depending on who is doing it, different tactics or different techniques for executing on certain work. They might use different tools, they might take different time to do different tasks. There's just a lot of different elements to this that can make it a bit difficult to understand what's really happening. So this is a big one to look out for. The last one that I always think is interesting to consider is how people internally communicate. So again, as far as the system is concerned, do you have a system for how you internally speak to each other, who speaks to who, why and when, etc.? The answer to most small agencies on that front will be no, and that's fine. It's just trying to establish what you currently do. For example, is it all through Slack? Is it all through email? Who sends what to which clients? Who sends what to who for approval, etc. So the main thing we're doing here is really just listing any system that you believe to exist or that may well exist, and trying to dig into it enough so you can establish how well it's doing the job that you expect it to. For example, do you onboard clients to a high standard in the same way every single time a new client signs on? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It could be an opportunity to strengthen that key part of your business. The last two stages then touch on time tracking and the tools and tech. I'm not going to dwell on these for too much time as part of this video. What I would say would be that time tracking is something that is debated, I suppose, hotly debated in the agency space. My view on this is quite simple. If you don't understand where your time is going as a business, how can you make proper, informed decisions about things like pricing, tools, people? A lot of it relates to how much time you're putting into something and what you're getting out of it. When it comes to clients, if you say to a client a certain thing costs a certain amount of money, even if you are blending in value or performance to that, you still need to understand for profitability reasons how much it's going to cost your agency to follow through on that work. If you don't do that, your pricing could be set up completely wrong, or you could be having the wrong people in the wrong places when it comes to work delivery. There could be a host of challenges associated with that. Do you know your team's utilization rate is another really key point, and there are a host of other things you probably want to consider, maybe more so with someone who's financially minded, and maybe even doing a version of this audit with them. That could be an accountant or a fractional CFO who can help you pinpoint maybe financial opportunities within the agency beyond this entry-level / starter point. Tools and tech, there's a similar element shining through in that all we're trying to do here is establish what's really being used by who and why. Again, it's good to get a pulse or get a sense for what is done manually with no assistance at all from maybe tools or tech. And is there anything that you've automated that you really want to make the most of or improve? Again, another view here could actually be that you've introduced too many tools, too much tech, or maybe even too many automations, and things are now quite messy. So take the time to list out anything that feels relevant here. Again, this is more about what is currently happening specifically within your agency. Okay, so we've gone through each of these 5 sections now, and by this stage, really, we are at a point where we've talked through each of the core elements that make up the agency from my perspective. These are the things that I ask a host of questions on. I would expect that you've got quite a long list of things you've jotted down. Some areas will have less information than others. That's generally because your agency, for example, maybe doesn't have that many clients, or you don't have that many processes, but you've got a lot of thoughts on maybe your own role within your business, or the people within it. It's going to vary, but you've gone through each of the key areas now. So it's a case of what do we do next? Okay, so next thing we're going to do then is review your answers. So we need to conduct a review of all the information you've shared to date as part of this audit. Quite simply, that's rereading your notes. If I was doing this with you, I would, at this point, share some initial thoughts or share an overview of what we've gone through. What I'd suspect you'll be able to do is pinpoint key areas. So based on things you've jotted down, you'll be able to say, I was really surprised by what came up in relation to clients. And specifically, let's just say churn. I was really surprised by how little I knew about my existing processes or systems. And as a consequence, I've realized I'm definitely the bottleneck as the owner. But it's probably because there are no systems or processes in place, and I am the one doing all of the client strategy and own a lot of the relationships. So whenever you do this, you'll build a bit more clarity around the key things that came up during the audit. And once we've done that, we can then think about what we're going to do with this information and how we're going to actually get things moving in the right direction. There are a couple of other questions I've added at the end of this audit here. So for example, what's the single biggest thing holding back your agency right now? You might say it's yourself. Have you been avoiding dealing with anything? It could well be the fact that you are probably at the heart of this problem. And now let's move into the question of what are your top 3 to 5 priorities for the next 90 days. So we've listed out a few examples here that shone through as part of your audit as an example. What we're now going to do is answer the question of what can we do about this? Firstly, before we agree with ourselves to start doing something new to address these things, we probably have to look at what we're going to stop to enable us to have more room to focus on improving these areas. So let's just say you're the owner who's identified client churn and processes as 2 very key areas that need work done to them. You, as a consequence of these areas not being set up right, are the bottleneck. What can we do about it? Well, first of all, the first step for you might be to say, I need to stop owning all of the client relationships. I have a very capable account manager in place, but I haven't given them the proper clarity and responsibility that they need to actually own more of these client accounts. That could be step 1. Step 2, as part of that, could be build a client onboarding system so that you don't have to do all the onboarding yourself. And step 3 could be build the delivery system. That means you don't have to oversee and monitor everything as an owner that's currently happening. If anything, that can be the responsibility of not only the account manager, but also someone that is leading the implementation of the work you're doing. So by those 3 steps being put in place, we have a partial, because partial is the key word, a partial or initial steps to resolving the challenges you're facing as an owner of the agency. But the key thing here is that this will not happen if you don't choose to stop something. And in this case, you realize you have to stop being the one that's doing all the communication with clients. The catch here is that that's obviously going to take some time to implement. You can't just expect clients to be okay with you saying, don't speak to me anymore. There are going to be some clients that are understanding of that and maybe already have a bit of a relationship with your account manager anyhow. There are going to be clients that really want to keep in touch with you because you brought them in the door 4 years ago. Another really important thing here is that you might not even have an account manager, depending on your agency size. And if these are the problems you've identified, the very first thing you're going to have to do is hire, for example. So depending on the stage you're at agency-wise and the size and shape, if you've highlighted these problems or these opportunities, your steps or actions that you take are going to differ. So again, the goal of this audit is to come away with 2 or 3 key actions that are going to get you moving in the right direction over the next 30 to 90 days to addressing the priorities across your agency that you have just established by doing this work. So if the first step was review, second step is action. And as discussed, based on what stage your agency is at, who you have, etc., your actions will differ. But what's super important at this stage is committing to doing something about it with the time available to you as an owner. Now that you've completed your self-audit, you're in a place where you've established the big opportunities or challenges that you're facing, you know exactly where they are and why, and you've mapped out the things you're going to do about it over the next 30 to 90 days. Of course, if you've gone through this audit with yourself and have established clearly where the key issues are, you might still be scratching your head about what to do about those next. That is where someone like myself could come in handy for you. I am the objective layer or the objective perspective that can come into your agency and say, hey, here's some things you might want to consider doing based on the problems that the audit has presented. If you'd like to talk to me more about doing that, there's a link below the self-audit tool in the description that will take you through to book a call with me and we can talk about it more. But for now, I would say collate your thoughts from this audit, summarize them, try to map out some next steps that will help you make a decision about what you're going to do to improve certain areas in your business.